nation, but today I'm presenting to you, Mayor Wheeler, the first ever citation, and it's not a parking violation, okay? But this is a citation to you, Mayor Wheeler, that declares this day forevermore, Thursday, October 25th, your day in the city of Portland. With that, please welcome to the stage one last time, Mayor Wheeler.
Well, I thought this was supposed to be a roast. First of all, let me just say how much I appreciate this. Andrew, thank you. I'm deeply honored, and I'm honestly very humbled. Jeanette, thank you. And in case you didn't know this, if my speech goes over half an hour, Jeanette's promised free round-trip tickets anywhere Alaska Airlines flies. I also want to welcome all the candidates for office. Thank you for stepping in. And I mean that both literally and figuratively. It's not easy running for public office, particularly not now, and I'm really grateful that there were, I think, 118 people who are running at the City of Portland level, but there's people running for all levels of government. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for caring enough about the community to make the sacrifice that by now you already know you are making. I want to thank our fellow business leaders, nonprofit leaders, Portlandians, and Curtis Robinhold. Welcome all. And I have to mention Curtis because honestly the airport just rocks and we all love it, and thank you for all your years of leadership. Sean, thank you for supporting George Fox University, the home of the ironically named Wheeler Sports Center. That's funny if you know me, never mind. Well, at any rate, so today I was asked to speak on reflecting, navigating change. And I was asked in particular to focus my remarks on tracing the transformative journey, as Andrew described, of our city, acknowledging some of the accomplishments, sharing frankly some of the challenges, and then sharing my vision and my hopes and expectations for the future of this community. I think we can all start off with a level setting. I think we all acknowledge that Portland has gone through a very challenging period. During my tenure as mayor, Portland has confronted, yes, an unprecedented number of simultaneous worst-case scenario crises. And they included civil unrest, record weather emergencies, both hot and cold, the MAX train stabbings, the Gorge Fire in 2017 that burned for 3 months and threatened our community's water supply, the COVID shutdown, the murder of George Floyd, record homelessness, spiking crime, record homicides, never before seen levels of litter and graffiti, amongst other issues. Yes, many of these problems are Portland specific, but in many other ways, I think they're reflective of the divisions and challenges facing our nation. We could have just reacted. We could have just pushed back against the changes, but we didn't. We instead shifted our culture. We leaned in to these challenges. I like to think of it as a judo maneuver. We saw an opportunity to pivot and improve our services to the community. And you know what? It also gives us an opportunity to show the rest of the nation how a community can overcome, how it can heal, how it can improve the way it delivers services during a period of dynamic change. We literally reinvented Portland government over the last 8 years to address the agreed upon priorities of our city council, and we are unified on these priorities: public safety, homelessness, livability, and economic recovery. Public safety, homeless, livability, and economic recovery. That is the mantra that we repeat each and every day, and that is where our priorities lie. We've created new programs and initiatives. We have funded those initiatives. We've brought in exceptional leadership to help move those initiatives to successful results. But maybe most importantly of all, we have shifted our culture. People historically think of cities as a large Band-Aid. A crime gets committed, call the cops. A fire starts, call the fire department. A pothole shows up on your street, call PBOT. Problem with the local swimming pool, call the Parks Bureau. It's reactive. But the kind of issues we're dealing with today require something other. It requires us to shift from being reactive to shifting to being proactive, not just by addressing symptoms, but moving upstream and figuring out what's actually causing the problem and what does it take to solve that problem. And this is especially true with multifaceted problems like the ones we're experiencing right now: homelessness, mental health issues that manifest themselves at the street level, record levels of drug addiction as new opioids enter the street. This requires us, therefore, to not work alone. We have to collaborate with other levels of government, with county government, with state government, and in many cases even the federal government, in order to be successful. Over the next few minutes, I hope to make a strong case that our initiatives and programs are making progress. It's my hope, and I want to make the case today, that the new mayor and the new city council should stay the course on these programs and initiatives because they are working. I also realize you paid to be here, which is slightly awkward for me, to be honest, especially for my colleagues on the city council who have to listen to me Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then all the other meetings in between. So I want to give you something I don't typically talk about. And that's, I want to get you into my headspace a little bit. I want you to know what makes me tick. I want to remind you who I was and use that as a preface to who I will be after I leave public office. I think it's fair to say, and just call this out, I'm typically characterized as an older, white, on the wealthier side male. And I also realize that when people describe me that way, it's intended to be somewhat of a criticism, somewhat dismissive of my status and my heritage. And it particularly galls me when people say in a negative way that I am the scion of a wood industry company. I want to tell you this. My family has been in this state for 6 generations. They were not always economically prosperous. I am very proud to stand on their shoulders. I'm proud of their legacy. My family first settled in the Oregon Territory. It wasn't a state then, in 1852. And they came the old-fashioned way, which is hard for us to fathom today. They walked. Did you know that? Wagon trains, you actually didn't ride in the wagon, you walked behind the wagon. And since that time of 1852, my family's history has been intricately linked to our state's development. And this historical connection has profoundly shaped my perspective and my commitment and my desire to serve this community, because literally multiple generations of my family are buried in the surrounding soil, as will I be one day. My family's experiences trace the arc of modern Oregon's history. On my mother's side, my great-great-grandfather, if I did the math correctly, was a guy named Johann Poulsen. And he was a partner in a lumber company called the Inman Poulsen Lumber Company. It actually is one of the largest lumber product companies in the West, west of the Mississippi. You've probably never heard of it. It's lost to history, but you would easily recognize Johann Poulsen's house on the east side of the Ross Island Bridge. It is that spectacular Victorian house. The company occupied most of what is now called the Central East Side, including all of the land that OMSI currently occupies. My father's side of the family, they weren't slouches either. My great-great-grandfather was apparently a very tough person. He could be apparently kind of a mean person, but he was most certainly a determined person. He started a lumber company isolated out on the Oregon coast. in an area that is now called, not too surprisingly, Wheeler, Oregon. And I have a funny story to tell about that. I went to the centennial of Wheeler, Oregon some number of years ago. I think it was 2010, if I remember correctly. I was state treasurer. I was invited to go. And this elderly gentleman came over to me, and I had the city council standing next to me, and I immediately recognized the older gentleman as a retired logger. He was wearing the uniform. He had a very beat up set of blue jeans on. He had red suspenders, and he looked like he'd lived in the woods and worked in the woods for most of his life. And he came up to me and he said, I knew your grandfather. I didn't know your great-grandfather, but I knew your grandfather, and I worked for him for decades. And he was a good man. I just wanted you to know that. And then he turned around and he started shuffling off, and then suddenly he had a second thought, and he came back to me, and he said another thing. If he knew you were a Democrat, he would have taken the business side of his axe and beat your effing head in with it. And you can imagine the city council laughing and going, welcome to Wheeler, Wheeler. My late grandfather was the first chairman of the board of Willamette Industries. It was one of Oregon's first Fortune 500 companies. And my late godfather, interestingly, a gentleman by the name of Bill Swindells, happened to be my godfather. My own career, unfortunately, has been less illustrious. I started my career as a carpet stacker in a carpet warehouse. I was a dishwasher at Piccolo Mondo Ristorante at John's Landing. Does anybody here remember Piccolo Mondo? I was a swim instructor. Then I served in various positions in banking and in finance after college. Hilariously, I owned a video store. And I did my research, and I invested heavily in the right types of videos. It was backed by the largest technology company in the world, Sony. It had the best sound quality, so the audiophiles liked it, and it had the best video quality, so the videophiles loved it. It was called Betamax, and it damn near bankrupted me. But through all it all, I had a very strong interest in public service. I believe that was instilled in me by my parents. I was an Eagle Scout. I served as my senior class president. I volunteered on the boards of good local organizations that serve vulnerable populations, like the Goose Hollow Family Shelter and Neighborhood House. But the one that really inspired me the most was the one that reflected my interest in the outdoors. And in particular, and this will come as a shock to those of you who've never heard this about me, I was an extreme alpinist. I loved high altitude mountaineering. The harsher the conditions, the more I craved it. I served as a rescuer with Portland Mountain Rescue for 8 years. This was an experience that filled me, I would argue, with equal amounts of pride and tears. This experience gave me a tremendous amount of respect for first responders, and I personally understand the trauma associated with being the first on scene to a disaster. I also helped launch the state's first nonprofit association, and I worked with a group of fellow community members to author the first ever report on vital aging in Multnomah County, and it was called What Are Old People For? This served as one of the first models in the country for vital aging programs, and I was really proud that our community came together and did that work. And those of you who remember former County Commissioner Maria Rojo DeSteffi, she was the co-chair of that initiative. I was also one of the first 2 City of Portland budget advisors. Back in the day, Tom Potter wanted a couple of citizens, ordinary folk, to take a look at the budget that the City Council was presenting, and I was one of the 2 people he picked. And the incredible Elsa Porter was the other individual he picked. So that was my first step into City Hall and understanding the machinations of city government. Before becoming mayor, of course, I had other jobs in government. I was the chair of Multnomah County, like Jessica over there, for 4 years. I was the treasurer for the state of Oregon for 6 years, and these were roles that I think exposed me broadly to government, helped me navigate some political landscapes from time to time. But I'm just going to tell you the truth, and I don't want to scare Mingus or Renee or Keith or any, Carmen is here as well. I don't want to scare anybody, but I got to tell you, being mayor is a completely different beast. And the facts show that. As many of you know, the last mayor who served more than one term before me was Vera Katz, who was elected to her final term a quarter of a century ago come November. There were a lot of people who told me not to run for mayor. I'd done well, I believe, as county chair and as state treasurer. And that could have been a good time for me just to take a step back, go back into the private sector or work in some other capacity. There's lots of ways to help the community move forward. And several of my closest friends said, don't do it. And I remember one in particular saying, Portland devours its mayors. That has stuck with me all of these years. But I did it anyway, just like you guys are doing it anyway. I felt compelled, in fact, to step forward. I saw the city's potential, and I believed I had something to provide to the community in terms of helping us overcome these challenges that we were facing at that time. And just to show you how thick-skulled I am, I actually did it twice. But honestly, I feel like I was made for it. It wasn't always fun. It wasn't always easy. I wasn't always successful. I did some things right. I did some things wrong. There are things I would do over and do completely differently if I could actually turn the clock back, but you can't. But I believe I was made for this. And in particular, one characteristic that a Portland mayor needs, in addition to an ironclad sense of humor, is resilience. My 3 expeditions to Mount Everest, snowshoeing to the North Pole, participating in many full-length Ironman races, I think helped build that sense of fortitude and resilience.